about still life, which was something the 17th century painters of Flanders and Holland excelled at. They painted and sold them in quantities in Holland. They exported them to well-to-do collectors all over Europe. Still lifes were high in popularity, despite the fact that they were actually low in prestige. In the opinion of writers on art during the entire century, still life ranked at the bottom of the various categories of art. At the top were history paintings, pictures of important events in history or scripture or myth. They were seen as more challenging intellectually and harder to do. You had to represent human bodies and expressions that had to be studied from the living model. At the beginning of the century, Karel van Mander wrote that still life painters were the foot soldiers in the army of artists. Nevertheless, writers did admire the best still life painters for their skill at mimicking the look of their subjects so vividly. Still life flourished in the real world of making and selling. As one recent writer put it, still life thrived in a theoretical vacuum. The pictures were fascinating to look at and at times an absolute wonder. Even beyond their uncanny realistic surfaces, these pictures have an ingenious structure and a play with form revealed by light that artists in later centuries have always understood without consulting treatises. This large painting by De Heem in the Louvre, for instance, was a starting point for Henri Matisse, who studied its structure and made his own large version of it, changing its colors, reorganizing it, and flattening it. Dutch and Flemish painters believed that their still lives, like history paintings, could convey ideas, that they could convey truths, and their customers did too. Still lives were often what I've called in my title, food for thought. They weren't just for looking at, they were for thinking about and meditating upon. In 1614, the writer Rumer Visser wrote in a book of emblems, "There is nothing empty or useless in things." He meant that you could look at ordinary things around you, and with a little imagination, they could lead you to some truth about life, about good behavior or bad, about material desires, and the possible danger they posed for the soul. Still life painting was often intended not just to be pleasing, but to instruct, to give people something edifying to ponder. Now, it's hard for us today to imagine just how strong this taste for moralizing was. To quote one writer, the Dutch had an relentless addiction to taking everyday things and either searching out their inherent inner meanings, extracting a moral lesson, or conversely, using them as vehicles to be loaded with ready-made ideas. When we say still life, we're using a term that was coined by the Dutch themselves, stilleven, meaning pictures of things that are either incapable of movement or that lack a soul. The range of things that painters depicted got steadily wider, and by the middle of the 17th century, it included many categories, including vanitas images, like this one, about the brevity of life, breakfast pieces with food and lots of it, kitchen still lives, pipe smoking pieces, arrangements of plain or very fancy wares and food, fruit pieces, compositions of dead game, pictures of dead fish. It was also a large category of flower still lives, so large that I'm going to deal with it in a separate lecture. In fact, the earliest independent still lifes we have, like this one by the German Bartel Bruyn, carry the sobering reminder written on the page here. Everything passes with death. Death is the ultimate limit of everything. A new approach to science based on observation and classification. Natural science was one of the ancestors of still life painting. And some of the illustrators of animals and insects and botanical specimens, like this one, Joris Hoefnagel, were also painters. The upsurge of painting in the 17th century was paralleled by the collecting of things. Not just precious objects made by craftsmen, but also and especially specimens of natural history that were evidence of the endless wonders of nature. For an entire century, European seafarers had been exploring Asia and Africa and the New World and bringing back amazing new material year after year. This was the great age, in fact, of what the Germans called the Kunst- und Wunderkammer, the cabinet of curiosities. Scholars and artists worked for princes and highborn patrons all over Europe to collect and classify and show the finest and most curious specimens.